Hello everyone and welcome to the Friday edition of the Daily Friend Show. I'm Nicholas Lorimer, who's hosting us today, and I'm here joined by not only a handsome panel but a powerful panel too. We have Mr. Gabriel Krause.
How's it?
Sarah Gon.
Thank you very much.
And Mr. Terence Corrigan.
How are you then?
Excellent. So we've got a little bit of a mishmash of things today. There isn't a clear theme that I can work up, and maybe we'll come up with it.
Yeah, bonus points if you can figure out the theme.
Yes. So we're going to start off by talking about how it actually looks like for the first time Brexit might have an end in sight. Now, unfortunately, for those of us who are just hoping that this long sordid tale could be over, the British are not going to be leaving on Thursday, or won't have left by the original date, which was yesterday.
Yeah, by the time you see this,
it would have been one day over. They should have left by now.
Yeah.
They have been given an extension until January the 31st. But the reason for that is that the British Parliament has agreed to an election on the 12th of December. So it's now all no holds barred, time to go ahead. What do we think is going to happen? Sarah, what's your view on this?
Well, the beautiful thing about a British election is it takes 4 weeks and it's over. I mean, that's unlike Brexit, which takes 4 years and maybe it's not over.
Yes,
something like that. And theoretically, the election's going ahead because both the major parties believe they can achieve the majority they need to push through the Brexit and run the country.
Well, can I come in on that?
Yeah, you can.
So I feel like the Labour Party's messaging wasn't quite on point.
It never is.
On the same day, they were saying, this is terrible. We don't really think it's a good idea for an election. The polls are showing we're not going to do well. But the Scottish Nationalist Party and the Liberal Democrats, they wanted to have an election because they're hasty and imprudent and silly. And so we have to go along with them, and we're going to have to make the best of a bad mission. And at the same time, there was another Labour representative who was saying, no, we really wanted an election all along. We've been demanding an election the entire year. There was a small little lacuna where we were saying no election, but let's not look at that. We always wanted an election. We're very happy to go through it.
So it looks like the Tories are way ahead in the polls. So usually in a British election, if the Tories get above 36%, they get a majority. Mm-hmm. They're currently polling anywhere between 32 and 40%, whereas Labour's down in the 20s and Lib Dems in the high teens, early 20s. But an even more shocking statistic came out. There was a survey done and they asked people, would you feel joy or fear if Jeremy Corbyn became Prime Minister? 25% said joy, 25% said don't know, and 50% said fear, which is, I think, not a great starting point for your election campaign.
Well, I understand, and it's been said for a while, that the business community, who, despite itself, actually will usually make a plan, has said said that if Corbyn comes in, they go out. They invest elsewhere. There are plenty of places like ours they could invest in, but they will be based elsewhere. They're not prepared to do business under a Corbyn government.
Terence, what do you think a Corbyn government would be like?
What do you think Corbyn government would be like? What is it that John Foster said about things being too dreadful to contemplate? Look, I think that there's an interesting combination. A Brexited United Kingdom under Jeremy Corbyn. I don't think that that offers anything of value to business.
It's the worst of all worlds.
Yeah, look, my own sense of Brexit over the years has been that this was something that the Remainers lost by just being way too cocksure of themselves. In a way, it was and I think they were what it ended up being was trying to unscramble an omelette that's been 30 years in the making. And I'm really not sure how one gets out of this. It's not the end of the world. Had Britain exited the world, the sun would still be shining. But
or not, as the case.
or not. Yeah. Well, you know,
It'll still be cloudy in London and sort of
and raining in
raining
Scotland.
I think that's a very important point. So let's assume the most likely scenario, as per what the polls currently say, which is that the Tories emerge with a comfortable majority. They enact Boris Johnson's deal, and the UK leaves the EU. There have been very serious divisions created in British society by this whole affair. There's been more tension and more stress put on the British political system than perhaps anything else for the last 100 years, in a century which includes 2 world wars and, complete change in the country.
Various World Cups.
Yes, World
Or
Cups.
not, as the case may be.
And the abandonment of its empire.
No, I've just got to say it's not more stress than was placed on the UK by the 2 world wars.
No, I mean in
on
the political system. When there was a unity government formed in the Second World War, by where all the parties came together to form sort of one government.
Yeah.
So, Gabriel, what do you think the way forward for, let's say Prime Minister Johnson gets back, he's got a safe majority, he gets Brexit, what is his next move once they leave?
The next move is to do 2 things at once. One is on foreign policy, to make sure that the United Kingdom signs, seals and delivers the best trade deals that it can. I think one of the arguments behind Brexit in the first place is that Luxembourg and Brussels and Frankfurt, and the sort of centres of power of the EU, are cumbersome because they carry so many vested interests that they're trying to deliver on when they go and sign trade deals, that they just don't have the alacrity. They're like a big, heavy cruise ship that can't turn around very fast, whereas the United Kingdom is a lot more like a speedboat or a tugboat.
Yeah.
So they need to sign, seal, and deliver some seriously good trade deals with the United States, with the Anglosphere. Maybe they could be nice to us. I imagine they'll be excited about doing some of the stuff in Africa that Theresa May was dancing up and down the continent about earlier on. And at the same time, the European Union, at the same time as making sure that they get the best possible trade benefits sort of boon out of this, they need a refocus on domestic policy. And I think that what the Conservatives are positioning themselves to do are to sort of really occupy the centre, and even some of the centre left, to keep the Labour Party very far towards the sort of Corbyn extreme. And in particular, I'm referring to the living wage, as they refer to the national minimum wage, which they're looking to increase fairly substantially. I'm thinking of the national health scheme that they have. Both that and the minimum wage are sort of already very well set up. I mean, it's nothing like what we have here, and they can afford to sort of open the taps a little bit more, make it a little bit more generous, and I think hope that between the boons for big business and the sort of social welfare increases, that they slake the United Kingdom's thirsts, sufficient number of those thirsts for people to calm down, balm the scrappy wounds of this political tussle, and get on with their lives. I assume that is all doable if they get a majority. I think it's important to note that a substantial difference between the Conservative Party now and the Conservative Party a few months ago, even after Johnson's election, is its cohesion. Something like the Democratic Alliance, it had a sort of moment of splintering, a moment of tension. It seemed to be pulling in 2 directions at once, and 22 MPs, I think, something around there, were basically expelled from the party by the leader. And since then, I think the ox wagon has gone from pulling in many different directions and sometimes getting a bit stuck to now all pulling in a cohesive direction. So that's not necessarily enough, but I do think that it means if they get a clear road ahead of themselves, they'll be able to make genuine gains.
Yeah.
Look, I think something to be flagged here. Should they get this right, and I think it's this is a conditional statement, and take Britain out of the EU. That, I think, is going to be a fault line in British politics for the next generation. I think every election, in every election, there will be some faction, probably factions within parties, whose big thing will be how do they take Britain back. I think on the other side of the channel, it creates an interesting dilemma. Would they have Britain back? Britain is not like Norway or Switzerland. It's still a substantial power. would they want it back to solidify that European bloc, or keep it out simply as being too culturally incohesive? And then what happens with Scotland, for instance? I mean, their referendum on leaving the EU was, as I understand it, hinged quite significantly on the idea that if they left the UK, they could lose their EU membership. And the EU may not be all that welcoming of a breakaway country coming in, because there's lessons for parts of Spain, etc., etc. A Scottish breakaway from the EU, from the UK, does that perhaps find some backdoor entry into the EU? And I think what set this whole problem up wasn't so much the decision to leave the EU, but the binary nature, in or out. Whereas really the more substantive question is on what terms in, on what terms out. There was a lot of talk about going the Norwegian option, which is, to all intents and purposes, being a member of the EU without calling yourself one, and you get like some control over your fishing grounds and whatever. But on the free movement of peoples, for instance, well, both Switzerland and Norway have that with the EU. Really, this is these are uncharted waters.
Very much so, and we'll have to see how they develop. It's going to be, I think, exciting conclusion to the tale of the past couple of years. So on to something a little bit different now, which is the Twitter's new move to ban targeted political adverts on its platform. So the CEO of Twitter, Jack Dorsey is his name, he put out a tweet, of course, a series of tweets explaining how exactly, what exactly Twitter's concerns were. He talked about various issues, which we will elaborate on, I think, just now. But basically the upshot is that if you want to pay to promote your tweets and they have a political message to be placed into someone's feed who doesn't necessarily followed you or retweeted something that you put out, then that was no longer going to be allowed. So, Gabriel, do you want to tell us a little bit about what your thoughts on this development is? Do you think it's good for discourse or bad for discourse?
Yeah, I am still trying to analyze it and digest it in my own mind. Some things that strike me are the sort of exaggeration that I think he makes of the power of Twitter. One of the tweets reads something to the effect of there's unprecedented ability for machine learning optimization to disseminate deep fake news.
Yes.
And micro-targeted sort of analyzed.
Is that distinct from the shallow fake news?
Yes. Any fake news for that matter.
Yeah. So and misrepresentation and misinformation. So I mean that stuff really has been around forever. I take the view that one of the more important speeches ever made was by Socrates about 2,500 years ago.
No Twitter problem there.
Yeah. And you know what Socrates said? He said there's this new technology. People are writing things down in tablets and even on parchment and so on. And he said if you write things down, then you're
no idea
forget.
what they're doing there.
And if you don't have to remember it, so your mind's going to go, and you can send letters, so you don't have to go to the effort of actually seeing people, so society's going to break down. And when you're reading something that someone else has written, you can't interrupt them, so it's much easier to bamboozle someone in writing than it is in conversation. He said if we get into this thing of writing stuff down, society's not going to last. Let me tell you, the heathens and the barbarians are going to knock over the door. Okay? He said that, ironically, his student Plato was feverishly writing it all down. And that's why we can read it 2,500 years later. So I think Niall Ferguson, a Stanford historian, he likes to point out that these disruptions can be real. I mean, writing was quite a real disruption, and so was the printing press, and afterwards came really a century of outrageous and barbaric sort of
chaos
slaughter
and war and disruption
in Europe. Yeah. So it's not, and the radio, wherever the radios appeared, there's been
many people have said that the rise of fascism is directly attributable to the radio.
Yeah, and TV brought you, it brought you The Simpsons, but it also brought you sort of telenovela kind of politicians. So there there are these disruptions. I don't think that the way that we really overcome them is by technological kludges and censorship and rules about what you can pay for or not pay for. I imagine someone saying, pamphlets are all good and well, but as long as they don't have political messages. Or I imagine someone else saying pamphlets are all good as well, as long as they don't mention anything about the church.
Yeah, no, exactly. One can imagine sort of 1500s printing press saying, well, we're not going to take any political or theological documents anymore.
Yeah.
We're just going to print nice little happy
stories. Fairy tales. And then the fairy tales end up being like about, killing some guy who sounds like a priest. Anyway, so I think it's a slightly naive view. I think it behooves Twitter financially to always exaggerate the importance of the internet. And really what it comes down to is you, me, the viewer. We have to be our own guardians. There is no shortcut to a healthy public square. The way that a public square gets to be healthy is that we all kind of, if we're seeing a fact, we double check that fact. And if we think it's very important, and otherwise we leave it. And just to give a sort of a cute example, today I saw on the news, I think you showed it to me, a tweet about the United States president putting a medal around a dog. A sort of medal of honor, because there's a dog that was associated with the death of the late terrorist leader of ISIS, and the Huffington Post correspondent,
White House correspondent,
tweeted this to say, I can't believe the president's spreading fake news. Because just by the way, he didn't actually put it on a dog. It's like obviously photoshopped. But it's like, and then someone else tweeted the president's face where the dog was, and then the dog's face where the president was, and with the arms, and it was like, I'm not sure if this is fake news or not, guys. Can someone confirm it for me? Anyway, so like, I would like to know what formula you would use to discern whether that is playful satire or whether that's political commentary. If someone wanted to boost that tweet in the way that you might want to boost a tweet of yourself. I mean, you can boost a tweet if you pay money of yourself falling off a roof.
Yes.
Or eating a hamburger through your nose. So why can't you boost a tweet of a president's face where a dog once was?
You're just giving me ideas.
Okay, so I think the distinction between politics and non-politics on a platform it's never very stable on a platform like Twitter that lives in the reinversion of semantic, this sort of French deconstructivist universe of jokes and synonyms and puns, visual and oratorical. I don't think it's sustainable. I think they're going to get themselves in trouble. And I think it's all really based on them trying to boost their own importance as if they change the outcome of the American presidency. That's the implicit message. We made the president that we've got, and so we don't want to do that again. And that's arrogant. That's not what made it happen. People made it happen, and people have to be better if it's going to be better.
Yeah, I don't know. Most tweets are basically sarcastic and snarky, so it can often be very difficult to
tell who means what.
So sorry, you and I were talking a little bit about how, so one of the expressed reasons for this is we want to stop fake news, right? But you and I were talking a little bit before this about how most fake news is actually organically spread, not through paid adverts.
Yeah.
What's your take on this whole thing?
I think it's a sort of loss-making virtue signaling on the part of Twitter, because there cannot be a paid, well, not there cannot be, but there's unlikely to be as many paid political adverts, particularly as the political party has to pay for them. So it's certainly, it wants to convey a message, it wants to grab attention. Maybe they do want to stir some trouble, but it's still paid and it's still a message, and it can be nothing like a whole lot of stuff that goes on Twitter. And what's likely to happen is in 10 seconds of an ad landing, it'll be part of the conversation, and the conversation will expand. And look, the political party will sure get bang for its buck, but I agree with Gabriel. I mean, as I say, I think it's virtue signaling. I think it wants to show that they're keeping out of the realm. Twitter is the political realm, so I'm not convinced.
Terence, do you have any hot takes for us?
Well, my opinion of Twitter is well known.
Yes, I'm not on it either.
What is it that you always say? It's a pox and a plague.
It's a pox and a plague.
Yes.
Look, I look forward to the day when the barbarians show up to ransack my property carrying a copy of Shakespeare's combined works and want to confiscate my vintage copy of the Jungle Book. But somehow I think
Not
Socrates may have been somewhat too optimistic on that. Twitter, it's geared for short, as you say, smarmy remarks. It's not conducive to nuanced discussion. It's kind of, and it's kind of tailor-made for abuse. If it was, I think we would have a certain utility is, communicating uncontentious stuff. Your holiday snaps or things like that. As for why they're doing it, I read an interesting analysis that said actually they make very little money out of these political advertisements, and most political campaigns actually don't invest a huge amount in them. So
Facebook is much bigger for political campaigns.
Yes, well, and Facebook apparently has been roped into this because they said that they are excluding the fact checking or accuracy requirements if the ads are political. I don't think that does a great deal of credit to Facebook, but really, I think you're in a space that's very, very difficult to control with any sort of accuracy. I mean, who gets to assess those sort of things? Would you wait for complaints? And if someone from Bangladesh wants to submit a complaint to the head office in America, who has the expertise to actually judge whether this is stretching the truth or uncharted waters.
What it may unintentionally do is bring together a single view on both sides of the Democrats and the Republicans, and that they'll both be annoyed that Twitter will not fly out their adverts. There's no particular...
Might bring the country together.
God forbid.
Against the common enemy, which is, of course, Twitter.
Just one other thing about it is that, there's points of they don't make a lot of money out of it anyway. What I would find... So the tweets, if you go... He makes 6 tweets. They're in this sort of chain, and
it's called a Twitter thread.
The youth. Thank you, Nick. So there's a thread, not a chain, and the first one gets most of the likes, and then they get much less likes. But then, the third or fourth one gets a lot more likes. And the point of that one, so it's the flaring argument. Is he says, we have to do this because imagine if we said that we're working really hard to stop the dissemination of false information, but if you pay us, then we'll pump your political ads. Now, if he said exactly the same thing, but he took out the word political, what would be the difference? Twitter still makes its money out of people spreading whatever the hell they want to spread. They've got no vetting process for anything else. So I would find it fascinating if Jake, the Buddhist up in his cave mountain... Jack, the Buddhist billionaire up in his cave mountain, came out and said, well, we figured out that Twitter is a swamp cave... pox and plague, and we don't think anyone deserves to make money out of it, so we're not actually going to accept payments for boosting anything. We're just going to let this be a sort of an experiment in human cruelty, sadism and masochism, and we're just going to watch it play out because we've already made more money than anyone deserves to make out of the spectacle of suffering that it is. If he said that, I would give him infinite props. But this kind of trying to carve off, be like, well, we're not going to make any more money out of the thing we hardly make money out of, and we're still going to keep making money out of people boosting sort of craziness.
Yeah. I think also they don't want the political circus that's happening around Facebook now, where Facebook is being seen because of the stance that it's taking not to regulate stuff. A lot of, especially Democrats in the United States, are saying, yeah, but how dare you? How dare you not fact check everything? Are you just going to go and post things from Donald Trump? Don't you know he lies? That seems to be their take. Jack Dorsey actually has a really good story about having dinner with Mark Zuckerberg, and Mark Zuckerberg refusing to eat any meat that wasn't killed, basically by him on his property. So then
by Jack or by Mark?
By Mark. And then they bring out a goat, and he killed it with apparently some sort of laser type weapon. This is the story that Jack tells.
Oh, God.
And then Jack was very not keen on the meats that was produced from this entire endeavor. Anyway, that's worth looking into. These crazy tech billionaires or something else.
Nothing else to do while you're earning all your money.
So, for our last piece, we're going to talk a little bit about, I think perhaps an opportunity to be a teeny bit smug, which is that Peter du Toit has written an article saying the problem is Ramaphosa. Terence, tell us about it.
Well, look, I don't think I am going to be too controversial when I say that Peter du Toit has not always, in every instance, been the Institute of Race Relations' biggest fan. I don't think I would be at odds with reality or guilty of peddling fake news if I said that we have had some serious disagreements. However, News 24, I do encourage people to go and look at his analysis. Cyril Ramaphosa has now become the problem. Smug, yes. We have been saying that that our current president was not the reformer that he was that he was initially made out to be. That the policy reform of that his administration was all tending in completely the wrong direction. But I must say, I read this and I didn't have any sense of satisfaction. I had a sense of sadness. I think that if Ramaphosa had his day in the sort of Mbeki era, where he was presiding over a booming economy, he could have actually gone down as a very impressive president. As it is, we saw yesterday that there just doesn't seem to be any sense of how to avert what seems to be coming down the tracks, which is not pretty. When we talk about a debt to GDP ratio of sort of 80%, when we talk about an economy growing at 0.5%, being outdone by the Zuma years. When we talk about how essentially the cupboards are bare, and how it can't be business as usual with our SOEs, but then in the very next line, but yes, it pretty much is going to be business as usual. This just the best image I hear. I can come up with something from a not particularly well-made 1970s movie when one of those old cars with no air conditioning runs out of petrol somewhere in a desert, and we get out with our bell bottoms and look around and say, where to from here? I don't have any answers. I want to read one line from this. Go and read page 23 of the budget policy book produced by Treasury. It's scary reading. In the past, government looked at expenditure on goods and services and capital budgets, which, according to Treasury, include school books, medical supplies, new schools and new hospitals, to make cuts. The space to reduce these budgets is shrinking. One thing, however, that just seems to be sacrosanct is wages, which would maybe be okay if we were a ballooning economy, and if indeed the state we have was the mighty developmental entity of government's imaginary and not the actual state we have. Sadly, I'm going to say this for the third time, uncharted waters.
Mm. So, Sarah, we had a irate person call us a couple of months ago, very upset. They were a member of the institute had compared Zuma and Ramaphosa to each other in some way, and they were outraged. They were furious that we had dared to make such a comparison, and they shouted at several of us for various reasons. They ended up calling us several times. And they were saying, how dare you can compare these two presidents together? They're not at all alike. And, I think I've actually come around to kind of agreeing. I mean, the economy grew much more under Zuma. So, Sarah, are you missing the heady days of the Zuma presidency and the wonderful economic growth we had?
I'll tell you what I'm missing is at least an element of decisiveness. It's something that Ramaphosa completely lacks. And just to point to, do you remember that television interview he gave on ENCA? It was sort of after the first year of, I can't exactly remember when it was. And as a sort of opening question, an informal opening question, the interviewer said, well, Mr. President, just, before we get on to the serious questions, how are you doing? How are things going? And he actually said it's much tougher than I thought. And I think that's the problem. He is not cut out for the job. He's as responsible as the rest of the ANC for Zuma and what Zuma left us, but he's not made of the metal. Seriously, although I would never have really wanted her, because Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma would probably have been, for better or for worse, a more decisive leader. And one of the realities, I mean, I'm explaining it now in an article I'm writing, but essentially, when you hear the General Secretary of NUMSA, heard her last night talking about, having to the working class and the poor having to sacrifice for the good of the country, etc., and cutting the public wage bill. And I thought, the ANC, through its own mistakes, is dealing with a union movement that represents very few people in the overall scheme of things, who harken back to an ethos, a political system that she's reflecting it virtually as a sort of the first industrial revolution. And sadly, the tragedy is when you have to go for austerity, jobs are going to be lost. And for those people who chose to be employed in the public sector and all the benefits that came with it, they need to be the first to lose the job. Clearly, everyone has been saying at Eskom they need to lose the jobs. Of course, the intelligent thing might be, when you assess which jobs should be lost, is to fire as much management as possible, and you probably get the best result anyway, financially.
Gabriel, you're looking very concerned, and the weight of the world laying heavy upon you.
No, I don't know. I do think it's worth... My view is that things would be much worse under Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. I think she was more decisive. I think she had more of a plan. I think she was more aligned to a particular faction of the ANC, the race nationalist looters, those who sort of resent poor black people and poor white people, speak up for poor black people while taking their money. I think we'd be more likely to see an EFF-ANC coalition at this point, because I think the ANC would have performed so deeply poorly at the election that it would hardly carry a majority without one. And I think that the ANC and the EFF in an open coalition would have allowed for the erosion of property rights through an amendment to the Constitution to roll through more easily, and I think we would have seen more attempts to violently repress the media and more attempts to sort of turn a blind eye from that kind of a thing. I think we might have seen a greater step towards an authoritarian left wing in the true sense of the term kind of direction. And with Ramaphosa, we've got this sort of dithering empty shell at the center of power, which is extremely unfortunate. It seems to all that I can tell that he's sort of a sweet-natured guy. But, my feeling is that Peter Bruce wasted his best line on Jacob Zuma. He said that Jacob Zuma is a man who never saw an idea that he didn't like. And it's just not really true of Jacob Zuma. I think there were plenty of things where he was like, that's not for me. But Ramaphosa does not seem to have seen an idea that he doesn't like. And I think Terence is dead right to point out that in this environment, it's the opposite of what we need. One of the things that weighs heavily on me is the youth unemployment rate. It's crazy that we've got 55% youth unemployment. It's crazy that 1 in 100 kids graduates from one of our public schools run by SATU effectively with a pass in matric. That is a problem that's going to be around for so much longer than Ramaphosa is going to walk the face of the earth, because despite him being a billionaire and having all the access in the world to the best medicine there is, there's just no way he's going to outlive the nightmare that he's presiding over. And it revolts me in a way that he's like, you see him in the budget speech yesterday being so jolly, God, it is a little bit like it makes me feel this sort of 19th century frustration of the lumpen proletariat looking up at the kings and queens in their palaces, having a jolly good old time, sort of with them looking down at us like chess pieces. That you sacrifice a few here, you play a gambit there. Who really cares?
I think the real problem is that it's taken people way too long to accept that the only thing that Cyril Ramaphosa really is a socialist. He was never that capitalist, that free marketeer that the business community put so much faith in. He never said he was, but he has said very clearly that he is a socialist. If you find the right speeches. And essentially he's a socialist. He wants to go down the NDR, but he's got a problem that he probably has figured out by now, if Tijan Mboweni hasn't sealed it, that it is not going to change things. And all that's led to, on his part, is stasis, complete stasis.
Well, I think that you always look at the incentives, and I think that what has intervened here essentially is that what are you trying to achieve? And I think that he's been stuck with a situation where his overriding goal is to keep his party together, and that means that it's very, very difficult to move on anything substantive. So there's endless rhetoric. When he was in London, he talked a fairly good game. Yes, he supports us, but we can't move too fast. One thing, though, I do think is that that's positive is that we no longer seem to hear about the long game anymore.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now we just have a problem, and that may be cold comfort, but it's progress.
Yes, very good point. And on that somewhat somber note, I'd like to thank you for watching us today. If you like the show, please subscribe, share us, do all those good things that YouTubers want you to do. That'd be very good at you. And also, if you want to hear the Monday and Wednesday editions of this show, please look for us on all the podcast apps, iTunes, Google Play. I think we were on Stitcher as well, where you can subscribe to us and get our analysis and updates on the country and the world every week. Thank you very much for joining us. If you like the work that the Institute of Race Relations does, take a look at the board back there. Please SMS your name to 32823. We'll call you back and sign you up as a friend of the Institute. Thanks for joining us.